Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're exploring Ryuho Okawa's teachings about the afterlife. We're diving into a text that maps out the ultimate unknown. So, whether you're a firm believer in the spiritual realm or you're just kind of curious about philosophical takes on human mortality, we're going to take a calm, focused look into this whole concept of eternal life.
So let's just jump right into it with this profound question. It's literally the one absolute certainty of human existence, right? Yet, it's the very thing we avoid thinking about the most. I mean, we spend decades preparing for our careers, saving up for retirement, planning vacations, but we rarely prepare for the one inevitable reality that awaits every single one of us.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Limits of Science and Equality in Death.
To ground our exploration today, we're looking at Ryuho Okawa's The World of Eternal Life. This text directly asks the big one: what actually happens after we pass away? It makes a fascinating argument that because death is the ultimate equalizer, it arrives suddenly, completely ignoring our earthly plans, religious leaders really need to step up as the true experts on death. It's a pretty severe warning to modern doctors and scientists who live entirely without acknowledging the spiritual world, while also acting as a modern-day guide for the rest of us.
And that brings us to a really critical distinction. Look at modern medicine. It basically views the physical body as a highly complex machine, right? When it gets sick or ages, it's just seen as a machine breaking down. Doctors treat the physical vessel, but spirituality, it focuses on the eternal soul. The source argues that modern science and medicine hit a fundamental roadblock here. By only looking at the physical body, they literally cannot fully comprehend the deeper fundamental problems of human life and death, simply because they're ignoring the invisible forces at work.
So, what exactly are those invisible forces? Well, the text describes spiritual energy. Think of it like this. Just as physical sunlight causes plants to grow, flourish, and eventually shed their leaves in a natural cycle, there is a spiritual sun. The light and energy from this spiritual sun bridge the visible and invisible worlds. This energy is actually what animates our physical bodies. So when a leaf falls, it's not the end. It's just part of a much larger, beautiful cycle of renewal. Moving right along to Section 2, when the soul leaves the body.
Okay, so what actually happens in those final moments? The narrative shifts to an almost mechanical precision here, and it's fascinating. According to the text, at the exact moment of death, when the heart and brain waves stop, the soul perfectly overlaps the physical body. It's described almost like a double exposure in a photograph where the soul is resting maybe just 1 or 2 centimeters outside the physical frame. It doesn't just vanish in a flash. Actually, it takes roughly 1 to 2 whole days for the soul to fully detach from the physical vessel. And this brings us to a very practical and, honestly, a pretty startling warning. Because that separation takes time, rushing the cremation process is incredibly dangerous for the soul. If a body is cremated immediately while the soul is still partially attached, the text states the soul can actually feel a horrific, painful, burning sensation. I mean, wow. But this provides such an interesting spiritual rationale for traditional customs like wakes, doesn't it? They naturally build in that absolutely necessary waiting period.
Next up, Section 3, the trap of materialism.
Now, here is the primary conflict in the soul's journey. What happens to someone who spent their entire life firmly denying the afterlife? The consequences outlined here are genuinely tragic. Because materialists completely reject the spirit world, when they die, they literally fail to realize they are dead. They retain their earthly consciousness. The text describes them wandering hospital halls in absolute confusion, wondering why doctors are ignoring them, or why their families are crying and won't answer them. By missing this crucial transition awareness, they end up suffering in a state of spiritual isolation. They might even hover around their physical homes or workplaces for years, unable to cross over the spiritual river, which is often called the Sanzu River.
But thankfully, the spirit world has mechanisms to help. And the source mentions a truly surprising phenomenon here. Because these lost souls in hospitals only trust modern medicine, spiritual guides will actually disguise themselves. They'll literally appear as doctors or nurses. It's this incredible act of compassion, using a form the deceased person already trusts to gently convince these trapped souls that their physical life has, in fact, come to an end.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, the mirror of judgment.
So, once a soul finally navigates that initial transition, it faces a major defining moment. The text calls it the mirror of judgment. Imagine a massive spiritual screen. It perfectly and undeniably reflects your past physical actions, your hidden thoughts, and your level of spiritual awareness during your physical life. It's this incredibly transparent review that ultimately determines a soul's destination in the afterlife, whether they're moving toward heavenly realms or much darker, hellish ones.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of ultimate equality under death. As you stand before this mirror, the text is crystal clear. Earthly status, your bank account, your academic pedigree, your family lineage, all of it means absolutely nothing. None of it. These earthly values are entirely useless here. We are all judged equally as bare souls based purely on the spiritual content of our character.
Finally, Section 5, Preparing for Death Today.
So if this is the reality of the afterlife, how are we supposed to live right now? Well, the text resolves that preparation doesn't start on our deathbed. It actually begins the moment we're born. It offers this incredibly powerful reframing. The life in this world is like studying abroad in a foreign country. Death is simply finishing your studies and returning to your home country. I love that. It totally removes the paralyzing fear of the unknown. We're just here to learn, to gain specific earthly experiences, and when the term is over, we simply go back to where we truly belong.
Therefore, while grieving the loss of a loved one is a profoundly natural human emotion, and obviously culturally important, excessive, paralyzing sorrow often stems from a fundamental misunderstanding. If you realize that the soul is simply returning to its true home, it completely changes how you process loss. Death is just a transition, It's a change of address, but it is definitively not an eternal separation.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If our time on Earth is just a period of studying abroad, a temporary assignment to learn and grow, what are you doing today to prepare for your return trip? Will your soul be ready to return home when your study abroad ends? I encourage you to deeply reflect on your own spiritual readiness. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.